Welcome to the second chapter of child psychology. In this chapter, we're talking mainly about genetics. Also, though, the genetic and environment interaction. I think I covered that a little bit in the first chapter. We discussed nature nurture, that issue. This is really where the first opportunity to really see what that nature versus nurture issue says. Most of this chapter is really about the biology of genetics, but we also want to incorporate into that how the environment affects that. Moving along, I find a particular question very applicable here. Over the years, and I've been teaching child psychology over 20 years, I've been interacting with people and their children even longer than that. And one of these issues that I find, and you're going to laugh at this, and I say this kind of tongue-in-cheek to make you laugh, but also to get you to think about something. I really don't think that most people know where babies come from. And the reason I say that is you listen to people talk about pregnancy and stuff, and you would think that they really do believe that a stork drops a baby on the front step. I mean, I'm serious. People really, they don't seem to connect sex and children. But you see, sex produces children. Every time a person has sex, there's a chance of producing a child. Oh, almost every time, right? And so I don't know we really make that connection cognitively. Consequently, we're going to find that a lot of people really are surprised when they produce children. Okay, basically, just following the outline of this chapter, we want to understand that the study of genetics is largely comes from, in psychology, what we call the evolutionary perspective. We want to see how we as people are somewhat shaped by our life experiences, our experiences with the world around us, that the things that we do often are done in adaptation to our environment, in that interaction there. Something happens, you respond a certain way. That's the evolutionary perspective. There's also an element to evolution, to the evolutionary perspective, that we want to understand the genetics, that the whole thing is designed so that our genetic material continues through the generations. So my lovely blonde hair here would be passed on to my children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even when I'm not here anymore. My genes are still there. Consequently, there's a lot on this chapter on genetics. Pay particular attention to what is a chromosome, what is a gene, and what is DNA. The bottom line is you are largely the result of your biology, your genetics. You are 50% of the genetic material of your mother and 50% of your father. Now, what does that mean? You may not like that person. You may not know that person. You may never have met that person, but they contributed to your genetics. So you have that connection. You have that biological connection. Also, I want to point out, I've used this term mother and father there. It's the only time, probably the only time, that I'll ever use mother and father in that biological sense. Usually when I say mother and father, I'm talking about the roles in your life. So you could have someone who mothers you who didn't contribute to your genetics. Same thing with fathering. Okay. Usually that's the way I use those terms. Okay. So you want to understand genes, chromosomes, DNA, all that. DNA is the material that makes up the chromosome. The gene is the section on the chromosome that is responsible or semi-responsible for a particular feature or trait. Okay. I say partially responsible because environment has something to do with it. So don't think of it like you get this genetic plan and then the genetic builders take the plan and build the house, and that's you. That's your genotype. That's theoretically or ideally what you're supposed to look like and be like. Think of genes more as a wall full of light switches, say little switches, right? So the environment comes in and turns some of those switches on and some of those off. So say you have the genes to be a schizophrenic, okay? Well, you grow up in this wonderful, loving household, and so your schizophrenia just means you hear some voices and might have to take some meds or whatever. Now you take the same genetics for schizophrenia, you put them in a child whose environment is abusive. Okay, parents burn the kid with cigarettes or throw him in the closet or something, and that child becomes a serial killer. So same genes, different environment, different result. So that's what we understand genes are like, these light switches that turn on and off. Okay. Okay, something else to consider. We start our lives at conception. Now, I know that sounds like, well, it is somewhat of a politically incorrect statement, but in psychology, we're interested in what makes people who they are, what makes you who you are. Life can't begin at birth. Life begins before that because of genetics, and also because this relationship that becomes very important between child and mother and child and father, and both those relationships are essentially important. That starts at conception. It develops in utero. There's interaction there. It's not as much interaction. It's face to face after you're born, but that kind of relationship starts. Next chapter, when we look at teratogens, you'll see the stress is a teratogen. So that those feelings that mom has are important in the development of the child. Okay, so let's keep that stuff in mind, that this relationship that's essentially important. Okay. I'll share more and more as we go on this semester about how the relationships are essential to the psychology of the people. Okay. All right. Well, y'all have a great week and take it easy. Take care of yourselves. And I'll see you again when we're talking about Chapter 3.